The sun was high over Lake Oswald, glinting off the water like it had something to prove. Our annual family barbecue had always been a noisy, sticky affair, grilled sweet corn mosquito spray paper plates sagging with ribs. I'd baked my peach cobbler the night before, knowing it was Brannock's favorite. 19 now, and taller than his father, he used to call me Peach Queen when he was little. Today, he barely said hello. Truett was nursing a light beer and pretending to know how to use the smoker. Callista was already on her second glass of rosé, her sunglasses large enough to hide the way she never quite looked me in the eye. Brannock stood on the dock surrounded by two college-age boys. I didn't recognize their laughter louder than it needed to be. I walked out to the water, careful on the wooden planks, cobbler dish in hand. "Come on, Grandma," Brannock said, grinning wide. "Let's see if you can swim like you used to." I barely had time to turn my head before I felt his hands, cold, deliberate, shove the middle of my back. My knees gave out. The sky flipped. I hit the lake like a stone. The cold ripped the air from my lungs. I kicked, clawed, tried to surface, but my arms felt like anchors. My shoulder screamed. The water filled my ears, my mouth, the corners of my eyes. For a moment, I truly thought this is how it ends, with their laughter above and the muck of the lake below. When I finally broke the surface, gasping, coughing, I heard them. Brannock bent over with his hands on his knees, laughing. One friend clapped. The other took a photo. Callista didn't stand. Truett didn't move. No one came to the edge. No one offered a towel. I dragged myself out, every joint trembling, hair plastered to my skull. My dress clung to me like shame. Brannock smirked. "Guess you can swim after all," he said. "Tough old bird." The others chuckled. The dock creaked under my weight as I stood and walked toward the shore, dripping silent. The cobbler floated in pieces somewhere behind me. I walked back toward the house with lake water squishing in my shoes each step, leaving a trail behind me like I was shedding proof of what had just happened. The grass stuck to my calves. My dress clung to my spine. I passed the picnic table where Truett had returned to his burger, where Callista was already pouring more wine. No one turned. I opened the sliding glass door dripping across the tile floor. My hand trembled as I reached for the dish rag hanging by the sink, but it was too small to matter. I stood there soaked and shaking, while Brannock's laughter echoed from the dock like it had been carved into the wood. I didn't speak. Neither did they. I went to the hallway linen closet, pulled out the guest towel, an old pilled thing no one else touched, and dried off as best I could. My cardigan, heavy with lake water, sagged off one shoulder. I didn't take it off. I let it cling. It felt honest. The kitchen was filled with the smell of grilled meat and sunblock. I watched them through the window. Callista flipped through vacation photos on her phone. Truett leaned against the porch post, chuckling at something Brannock said. They'd moved on already. I lowered myself into the wooden chair at the breakfast table, the cushion dampening under me. My knees ached from where they scraped against the dock. The back of my throat still burned with lake water. I blinked, and suddenly, I was staring at Brannock as a boy 6 years old curled up against my side, asking if angels wore glasses. I remembered him leaving crayon drawings under my pillow, always with a crooked heart in the corner. That boy was gone. What was left stood above me and smirked while I gasped for air. Maybe it hadn't happened all at once. Maybe it had been a slow drain, the skipped thank yous, the mock sighs, the way Callista rolled her eyes when I told stories. I wanted to believe it was an accident, a dumb joke gone wrong. But sitting there in wet clothes, invisible in my own kitchen, I realized I didn't believe that anymore. Dolores didn't knock. She never did. just barged in through the side door like always holding a paper sack in one hand and 2 takeout coffees in the other. Her sunglasses were too big for her face, and her windbreaker made her look like she'd just walked out of a storm. Maybe she had. "You look like something that's been wrung out and hung up wrong," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "Sit." I brought muffins and righteous indignation. I sat because Dolores didn't ask twice. She pulled out 2 blueberry muffins, still warm, and shoved one into my hand before I could argue. The smell alone nearly undid me. She took one look at the bruises on my forearms and the way my cardigan drooped and didn't bother with small talk. "What did they do?" she asked. I didn't need to say much. Just a few words, a cracked retelling of lake water and laughter, and her expression turned into stone. She didn't gasp. She didn't shake her head in disbelief. Dolores had known me for 40 years. She'd seen this slow rot before I admitted it myself. "Then it's time," she said flatly, for what I asked already knowing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folder. Inside was a business card. Peter Holloway, Estate and Family Law. Clean font. Simple design. The kind of man who didn't bother with frills because his work was final. "I don't need a lawyer," I murmured, but even as I said it, my voice gave me away. Dolores didn't respond. She just placed the folder next to my muffin and sipped her coffee. "You paid for his braces, covered their rent 2 summers in a row, bought all the groceries while they posted pictures of their Cancun trip. You gave them everything." "I thought that was love," I whispered. She looked at me, then sharp and unwavering. "It was. But they weren't loving you back. Just draining." I stared at the card, my fingertips grazing the corner. Upstairs in my nightstand drawer were the ledgers. Every dollar, every sacrifice. And for the first time, I wondered what they'd do if I simply stopped giving. I started small. One afternoon, I left the milk on the counter and sat quietly in the living room, waiting to see who would notice. No one did. Later, I stood at the pantry and stared blankly at a box of pasta until Brannick walked by and muttered, "She's spacing again." I scribbled that down in the corner of my journal, spacing again, as if I'd ever lost my place before. At dinner, I fumbled with my fork and let it clatter to the floor. Callista flinched, not from concern, but from inconvenience. "She's not safe with knives," she whispered to Truett loud enough that I was supposed to miss it, but I didn't. I added her name to a new column in my notebook, Avoids. By Thursday, Brannick had started speaking about me like I was a broken appliance. "We should look into something," he said, scrolling through his phone. "She can't keep track of her meds. She almost left the stove on." That wasn't true. I'd turned the burner off before he even came downstairs. But I let it stand. I let the lie settle between them while they stirred their coffee with smug certainty. I carried in the groceries the next day, 3 bags at a time, letting them bump against my legs. No one offered to help. When I tripped on the step, Truett barely looked up from his laptop. I noted that too. In the quiet moments when the house hummed with nothing but the sound of Brannick's video games and Callista's wine glass tipping, I wrote names. 2 columns, notices and avoids. The second one grew longer by the day. On Sunday, I asked Brannick what time his class started on Monday. He didn't even glance up. "Community college doesn't take attendance," he said. "Besides, you'll forget by tomorrow anyway." I nodded, thanked him, and folded the laundry. Slowly, 1 towel at a time. My hands were steady. My mind was sharp. But I made sure the bathroom cabinet door stayed open and the Tylenol bottle sat just crooked enough. Let them believe I was slipping. I was only testing how far they'd let me fall before they noticed I'd gone. The office was quiet in the way hospitals are clean cold, waiting for a decision that couldn't be undone. Peter Holloway looked exactly as Dolores described. Neat hair, calm eyes, the sort of man who didn't fill silences, but waited for them to matter. He asked no unnecessary questions. Just opened his binder, read through the files Dolores had helped me gather, and said, "Are you ready?" I nodded. We started with the fund. Brannick's education savings built over a decade, birthday checks, holiday bonuses, Cliff's life insurance policy after he passed. $80,000 untouched because he hadn't transferred yet. Because I hadn't said no. Until now. Peter typed as I spoke. "I'd like to redirect the full amount," I said, voice steady, "to the Cressida Foundation. STEM program. First-generation college girls. Anonymous donation. In memory of Clifford Langford." He paused only to glance at me, confirming I meant it. I did. We moved to the house next. The lake house, the same one where Brannick shoved me in where they drank wine while my skin turned blue with cold. The property, I said, goes to Safe Haven North, a shelter for women who need a way out. Peter blinked once. That's generous. I looked down at the deed. It's justice. The remainder of my assets. I split between two organizations I'd volunteered with in my 30s. Quiet places. Ones that saw women like me long before I became one. Peter slid the final page across the desk. "Sign here," he said, handing me the pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't sign Mom. I didn't sign Grandma. I wrote slowly and clearly, Morella Quinn Langford. When it was done, Peter closed the file and leaned back. "Would you like me to send notice now?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I want them to believe everything is still theirs." He nodded. He understood. Outside, the sun bounced off car windshields, and people moved past without noticing me. I stepped onto the sidewalk and breathed in a lungful of air that didn't taste like chlorine and silence. Let them keep underestimating me. I was done asking to be seen. I packed the night before. One small suitcase, the kind flight attendants used to roll with pride, even though I was only going by train. 3 sweaters, a pair of walking shoes. My gardening gloves, the leather journal Cliff gave me for our 30th anniversary. I slid one photo into the side pocket. Brannick, at age 5, missing teeth, and hugging a pumpkin larger than his torso. I didn't take it to remember him. I took it to remind myself of who I had been to him. The rest stayed behind. The house, the furniture, the letters I had written and rewritten in my head. They would have to live with the echo of me, and maybe that was louder than any goodbye. In the kitchen, I scribbled a note on the dry erase board. Gone with Dolores for the weekend. Back soon. M. I didn't bother with details. They wouldn't ask. When I rolled the suitcase to the front door, it thudded once on the bottom stair. Brannick glanced up from his phone, then back down. Callista. Folded laundry without looking over. Truett muttered, "Drive safe," as if I were heading to the grocery store. None of them asked where, none asked why. I went to bed early, fully dressed, my bag zipped and waiting beside me like a promise. The alarm went off at 5:00 a.m., and I moved through the house like mist, soft, unnoticed. I paused once in the hallway, staring at the walls I'd painted with Cliff, the molding he'd sanded down with arthritic fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't write a letter. There was nothing left I needed to explain. Dolores was waiting in her car at the corner, headlights low. She didn't speak when I got in, just reached over and squeezed my hand as we turned away from the house that no longer held anything I wanted. The train station smelled like weak coffee and rain. I boarded without looking back, choosing a window seat that faced east. The town disappeared behind trees and telephone poles. I leaned my forehead to the glass and let them vanish too. The apartment at Sycamore Hills was modest, clean, quiet, with a view of a small grove where cardinals nested. I unpacked, slowly folding each sweater with care, placing the photo face down in the drawer, and setting the leather journal on the desk by the window. That afternoon, I sat at that desk and began the letter. I didn't rush. I let the words come like breath, slow and deliberate. I wrote their names at the top, Brannick, Truitt, Callista, as though addressing a committee that had already made their decision. There was a time when I believed love alone could earn me respect. I stayed silent while you dismissed me, laughed at me, used my home, my time, my savings, because I thought being needed was the same as being valued. It is not. Brannick, I held you through asthma attacks. I paid for your schooling, your piano, your braces. I kept your drawings in a binder under my bed. And when you pushed me into that lake, you didn't just steal my breath. You stole the last illusion I had of who you were. Callista, you called me dramatic as I coughed up water. Truitt, you looked away. Not one of you handed me a towel. So I dried myself off, and I left. I paused, placing my hand over the page. My chest didn't ache anymore. Not like it used to. The university fund is gone. Redirected. The inheritance is no longer yours to anticipate. The house will shelter women who know what it means to be forgotten. I am not punishing you. I am releasing myself. I gave everything. You gave nothing back. So now you get silence. At the bottom, I didn't write. With love or yours always. I signed it, clearly, carefully. Morella Quinn, Langford. No return address, no phone number, just a sealed envelope placed in the outgoing box by the lobby, dropped in without ceremony. I watched it disappear behind the brass flap, like it had never belonged to me. And for the first time in years, I felt unreachable by design. Peter called 3 days after the letter arrived. His voice held a trace of satisfaction, like a quiet drumbeat, beneath his usual professionalism. They tried to access the fund, he said. Denied, of course. I've redirected all correspondence to my office, just as you asked. I pictured Brannick's face entitled Confusion, sliding into panic. He likely expected a lecture, maybe a tearful voicemail begging for forgiveness. Instead, he got silence and locked accounts. The next morning, they reported me missing. A uniformed officer showed up at Peter's office with a notepad and a look of polite concern. Peter handed him the documentation, will letters, proof of travel, legal updates. She left of her own volition, he told the officer, and is under no legal obligation to be found by those she's chosen to avoid. Word spread fast. At Lake Oswald, the neighbors started asking quiet questions, the kind that linger in half sentences. I haven't seen Morella around lately, has anyone? At church, Mrs. Grafton noticed I hadn't brought the lemon bars for potluck. Callista smiled too tightly and said I was on retreat. Brannick's tuition refund never showed. He called the college office. They told him the scholarship was voided and redirected. Callista's friends, women with curated Instagrams and sharper instincts than they let on, stopped inviting her to wine tastings. One asked too sweetly, "Didn't your mother-in-law fund that I thought you said she adored Brannick?" Truitt said nothing. He sat in the den watching television on mute while his phone buzzed with notifications he didn't answer. Back at Sycamore Hills, I made tea and planted basil in a windowsill pot. I moved slowly through the day, not because of age, but because I finally had the room to. Dolores called that afternoon and said, "They're unraveling. Callista's been asking around." I smiled into the phone. Let her. Let them all circle the space I left behind. Because I wasn't gone in the way they wanted. I was simply unreachable. and for once the silence between us belonged to me. Peter told me they arrived 15 minutes early. Callista in pearls pretending composure, Truett with his mouth tight, hands shoved into his pockets like they might still hold something. Brannock sat with his legs spread, arms folded, trying to look unbothered. Peter said he didn't offer coffee. He didn't waste time either. He opened the folder and looked at each of them before he began. "This is from Marella Quinn Langford," he said. "Per her wishes, I will read it in full. You mocked me as I drowned. You laughed when my body hit the water and called it a joke when my breath wouldn't come. You watched and said nothing. You dried off your wine glasses while I choked on silence. You loved what I gave, not who I was. You loved my money, my meals, my willingness to disappear when it was convenient. That time is over." Peter said Callista opened her mouth, but he held up a finger to stop her. "Brannock, your fund is gone. Redirected to those who still believe in decency. Truett, the house you never fixed a window in, will soon belong to women escaping their own versions of this story. Callista, the version of me you thought would stay quiet, no longer exists. I am not punishing you. I am freeing myself. I stayed too long, gave too much, watched myself fade so you could shine in rooms built on my labor. There is no inheritance, no fallback. There is only the truth. I loved you. That was not the mistake. Expecting love in return was." Peter folded the letter and placed it back into the file. No one spoke for a long time. Then, according to Peter, Callista stood first, white-faced and shaking. Truett didn't move. Brannock's bravado crumbled just slightly, like a boy watching a door close behind him. Peter didn't see them out. He just looked out the window for a while before sending me the transcript. I read it on my balcony that evening, the wind gentle on my cheek, and wondered quietly if they'd ever loved me even once, would I still have stayed. It's been a month. Each morning, I open the balcony door before the sun finishes rising. The tomatoes are just beginning to show blushes of red. I water them slowly, the way Cliff used to, low and steady at the roots, never too much at once. He always said things grow best when they're left undisturbed but not forgotten. My tea stays warm longer here. Maybe it's the calm. Maybe it's that I'm not rushing anymore. No one in Sycamore Hills calls me Grandma. They just call me Marella. It startled me the first time someone said my name without expectation behind it. Just a greeting, not a request. It felt like being seen without being summoned. On Wednesdays, I go to the community chess club. I don't play well, but no one minds. There's a man named Conrad who lets me win and laughs like it matters. There's a woman named Sable who brings lemon bars. They taste nothing like mine, and that's fine. They don't ask what I left behind. They only ask if I'd like another piece. Dolores visits on Sundays. She talks too loud and always brings coffee with the wrong amount of cream. She tells me what's trickling in Callista, avoiding eye contact at the store. Brannock dropping out of school. Truett reapplying for loans he used to scoff at. I let her talk while I deadhead my begonias and refill the bird feeder. I don't gloat. I just listen. Sometimes late at night, I sit with my journal open but write nothing. Just sit there, the pen resting in my hand, like a final word that doesn't need to be said. They haven't written. Haven't called. I imagine they're still trying to explain me away to themselves. I used to live in their shadows, funding, cooking, folding, forgiving. I thought that was love. But peace is a different kind of warmth. It asks nothing. It proves everything. I finish my tea and rinse the cup. The wind carries the scent of rosemary from someone's window. I close the balcony door behind me and leave the silence exactly where it belongs.